Hello everyone, and welcome to your fourth core animation tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to be covering how we can work with keyframe animations. In the previous tutorial, we talked about how we could work with a CABasic animation object, which is pretty basic, as the name might suggest. We go from some value to another value, and well, it's a fairly simple idea. Over some elapsed time, or some duration, we go from a value to another one. Pretty simple. So the more complex version of that would be a keyframe animation. And what this allows you to do is have multiple values over a set period of time. And so to kind of explain how keyframe animations work, we're going to venture over to Keynote and observe what we're doing. So just kind of watch this animation for now, and this animation just represents our bike in the window. That gray area would represent our window in a normal application, and that bike is our nice image that we always move around. And so this keyframe animation would essentially move this bike kind of along this window to the top left, top right, bottom right, and then back to its initial position. So using a keyframe animation, this is very easy. I set up the values that I want to move to. The values would be represented by the origin point that we're moving around for the bike. So I just move the origin, or the location of where our picture is located. And so if I move this origin, I can set up a bunch of different values that I want to move to, and then I set up the time, or the key times, that I want to move across. So essentially, like I was saying, the values are just the positions that we want to go to over this animation, and then I set up the specific times that each one will take. Now when you use keyframe animations, what's really nice about this is that the time space that you work in is between 0 and 1. Now this doesn't mean that the whole animation will take 1 second. It just means that basically this is the scale that we work in when we want to address our entire animation. The start of our animation will be 0. The end of our animation would be 1. So the middle of our animation, for example, would be 0.5. And so this creates a very simple space that we can work in. We don't have to worry about the specific duration that the whole animation will take. So for example, if we say that this animation will take 12 seconds to complete, we set the duration to be 12 seconds, but it means that our animation will still stay the same. We don't have to worry about the exact times that each frame will represent. So for example, if we were saying that the animation was 12 seconds, each increment would represent 3 seconds duration. So 0.25, whatever the value at our key time of 0.25 would be, would represent the 3 seconds long. So to go from here to here would take 3 seconds. Another 3 seconds would be from 0.25 to 0.5, and so on and so forth, because the entire animation takes 12 seconds long. Likewise, if this animation was 4 seconds long, each increment, so our little 0.25 counts that we're making here, would be 1 second long, right? Because the entire animation is at the 1, or the end of the animation, right, is 4 seconds long. So each key time in between 0 and 1 represents the appropriate time that we're scaling across. So the keyframe animation, though, makes this really easy because we don't have to worry about the exact duration that the animation will take. We just have to worry about the relative time that each frame has to adjust. So we really only worry about how far we want to move across the entire animation. We don't really have to worry about how long or how far we're moving between each animation. So we're not concerned about the total time. We're just concerned about the relative time in terms of our entire animation. Anyway, I'll stop talking about that, and I'm sure you'll understand it by the end of this tutorial anyway. So here we have set up what I wanted to set up in the first place, and I'm just going to quit Keynote here. Alright, so here's Xcode, and I've already plopped in what I've called the keyframe view. This is the same sort of idea as the view that we were working in last time, which we called move view. So it's just a custom view, and I've called it keyframe view, and I've added that object already. Alright, so what we're going to do is the same sort of thing we did previously. We want to have an image view, so image view. And we'll just call it the same thing like we did before, image view. And of course we'll initialize that as well. So we have our image view, NS image view, alloc init with frame. Let me just get rid of some other code here. There we go. And let's make our starting frame. So ns make rect, we'll have this being at the bottom left corner of our frame. And let's say that, we'll take the frames. Let me just take a new line here. We'll take the frame that this whole keyframe view is created in. We'll take the size and its width, and we'll divide that by 3. And we'll do sort of the same thing for the height. We'll take the frame size, height, and divide that by 3 as well. Alright, so with that being said, we have our image view now. And what we want to do is set up, standard stuff. So we'll set the scaling, image scaling, NS image scale, axis independently. That just means that our image will scale to fit the entire view. And then, of course, we have to set what image we want. So take an NS image, image with name, or image name, sorry. And the image that we have named is just image.png. Whatever your image is that we've thrown in. Again, I've added my little bike image into our project, so if you haven't done that, of course, you'll want to make sure you have some kind of image in your Xcode project. Alright, so now, of course, we can just add this to our view. So add subview, image view. Alright, so of course now we should get a pretty little bike if we go ahead and run this, and it's always kind of nice to check to make sure that you have what you expect, as you go through. So as you can see, we have kind of what we expect. Alright, so now let's make a method to set up our animation. So we'll call this setup animation, and we'll make this method down here. So void setup animation. There we go. Alright, so let's give ourselves a little bit of room here to work, and let's start. So first off, we want to be creating CA keyframe animation objects, and these of course are part of Quartz like they were last time. So usually for all these projects, I'll just add the Quartz core framework. This is another one of those things, if you're working with animations, more than likely you're going to use Quartz core. So from now on, we'll probably just always include the Quartz core framework, and I won't be showing you how to do this, but for the last 2 tutorials we've done it, so you should know, of course, how to do it by now. Alright, so let's go back to our view here, and we have to, of course, import our thing that we just linked to. So Quartz core header file, there we go, and now we're good to go. Alright, so let's look at our animation. So we want to create a CA keyframe animation. This is the animation that we're creating. Let's call it Keyframe Annie. And we just do the same thing that we did previously. We create a keyframe animation using the animation method. This just sets up an animation for us. It's the same thing as sort of calling alloc init on any other object. It's just a class method that gives us back an animation. Alright, so how can we set up what we wanted to set up before? Well, there's a few ways that we can actually do this, and this is one of the cool things about keyframe animations, but we'll do it sort of the way I was discussing. So we're going to have a bunch of values that we're going to go to, essentially. We're going to be going to the top left, the top right, the bottom right, and then back to where we initially started. Those are going to be the frames of which we want as values for our keyframe animation. So let's change our duration here just to be a little bit longer. So we'll make it 4 seconds long, and let's just go ahead and set some stuff up. So we want to set up our values for this. So these are sort of the main things that you'll use if you're using keyframe animations. One is values and the other is keytimes. Those are probably the more important things that you use when you're using keyframe animations, because those are the obvious reasons you use a keyframe animation. So for values, what we need are all the values that this animation will go to. So we need everything from the start value to the end value for this animation. So we want to make basically a bunch of origin points that we want to animate our image across. So to do this, we're going to get the current x and y value just to help us out. So we'll say CGFloat x, and we'll just steal the current position of our image view. So image view frame dot size dot or not size dot origin dot x, and then we'll make another one for the y, CGFloat y, and image view frame dot origin dot y. All right, so we're just getting the frame, and then we're taking the value from those structs of the x and y origin points. All right, so now we can easily make some values here for our frame. So we want to use NSValue to wrap these, because again, NSArray always takes objects, Objective-C objects, so we have to have some way of representing these as objects, and to do that we're going to use NSValue. Again, it's just a class that wraps other objects into an Objective-C class basically. So we'll use value with point in this example, and like I was saying, we're just basically going across all the different points that we want to move our origin, because that's what we're trying to do in this animation. So we will use NSMakePoint, and we'll use our x value and our y value, and of course this represents our first point. So when you're starting these animations, you have to take into account where you're starting. So we're going to start at the x and y current position, that's where our animation starts, and then we've got to go all the way around to get to the end. So for this animation, I'm not making any I'm not going to be exact with my points here, but if you were making a professional application, you want to take into account the actual current size of frames, etc. But in this case, I don't have that much time to think about that, and it's not that important. So we'll just use some arbitrary values to add and subtract. So let's say our x won't change anything, but our y, let's say, will go up 200. Now let's throw in a value for our x to change. So value with point, and I should just be copying these, but anyway, x plus, let's say, 300, and our y will still be up 200. Alright, so just to follow along, this is our initial point, then we moved up 200 pixels or 200 points, then we moved to the right 300 points, and we're still up 200 points though, so this represents the top right corner. I'm just going to copy and paste some things here now. So copy this, paste, and now we're going to go down to the bottom right corner, so we're back on the initial y height, and then we go back to our initial position. So just type in the x and y that we initially had. Alright, so those are the keyframe animation values. And if we left it as is, we don't even actually have to specify the times. The animation would actually take care of this itself by splitting them up into the appropriate times. So it would split it up evenly across the entire animation. So the first point would represent the 0 in our key time. The next point would be 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and then 1. So it just divides up the entire time space it has by the number of points you have to go to. So with that being said, I could actually just add this right now to my image views. So I'd say set animations, and I pass in my animations dictionary with the key I want to animate. So in this case, we're talking about the frame origin that we're animating, so that'll be frame origin, and the object we are using to animate this is our keyframe animation. Alright, so the last step is to set up a method so that we can actually run this. So we'll call mouse down, and mouse down, we will just get our image view to move. So we'll call the animator, and then we will set our frame. So in this case, our animation's going from the point it starts to the point it starts again. So it's just making a full circle essentially. So we're not actually changing the frame position, but we want it to be in the exact same place it started. So to do this, we could just take the frame that it currently is at. So we're setting the frame to be the current frame, but that's what we want in this animation because we are going back to our initial position. But by calling the animator, right, even though our animation is just going back to the same point, by using the animator, we're actually going to be calling this entire animation. Alright, so let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So we can see if we mouse down, we have our bike and it moves, it does cool stuff. Alright, so that's what our bike does, right? That's exactly what we expected to do. It takes 4 seconds long and it linearly interpolates through all these different values. Cool. So that's nothing too special. As you can see, if we change this to 8 though, we could see it take a little bit longer. So it takes 2 seconds to go to the first point, another 2 seconds to go to the next point, another 2 seconds to go to that one. It's going to take 2 seconds to go back to where it started. Alright, so what if we want, this is cool and all, but it's not the most exciting thing in the world. What could we do and change some things up? Well, we could change the actual times. So instead of just having the animations split up the times for us themselves, we could actually set an array of key times that each value represents. So, for example, we will set up these key times here, and this will make, I'm sure, perfect sense by the time I'm done. So each key time, the number of key times has to match the number of values we have. So what happens is we pass in this array of key times, and if we have 5 values, which is what we have for the number of values, we need to have 5 key times that represent how long each one of these transitions will take, essentially. So obviously the first point is going to be 0. So we can use the literal syntax to represent, if we put an @ before the number, this represents an NS number wrapped, and that would be an int in this case. We can make it a double, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So just wrap your numbers in NS numbers using the @ syntax. So what we're saying now is, well, our next point is going to, take however long we want. So let's kind of change this up, and let's say that this point is going to take to the 0.4 mark of our animation to actually get to the second value. So this means that for the entire duration, means like between the 0 and the 0.4 mark, we're only going to the top left of our screen. So this is going to be a very sort of slow animation to the top left of the screen. Likewise, if I do, let's say the next point is 0.8. This is going to be also a fairly slow animation relative to the next two, right? Because we've moved, again, 0.4 in our 0 to 1 space here. But we still have to, fulfill the other points. So what ends up happening is, let's say the next 2 points are 0.9, and of course the last point is 1.0. So as you can see, the first point is going to be at the 0 time mark, right? Then we've moved 0.4 in time space, right? So 0.4 when we have 8 seconds. Well, let me just change this. I'll change it to 10 seconds to make your lives a little bit easier. So this whole animation is going to take 10 seconds long. It means that the animation from the first starting position to the second position is going to take 4 seconds, right? It's going to take 4 seconds to go from this first value to the second value. Likewise, it's going to take 4 seconds again to go from the second value to the third value, because that's what we have as our third key. Then it's going to take 1 second to go from this point to this point, and only 1 second again to go from this point to the last point. So the first two are going to take rather long, and then the last two are actually going to be pretty quick. All right, so that's essentially what this animation will do. And as we can see, if I run this animation, you can see that this first animation, very slow, takes 4 seconds. Then it's going to take another 4 seconds to go to the last point, and these last two are going to take 1 second each. So there you go. That's essentially how you can change how this animation is paced. Now, there's other things you can actually do to make this animation a little neater, which is change the actual calculation mode. Calculation mode is kind of an interesting feature of keyframe animations, where you can change sort of the pace or how the animation is displayed. So for example, if I use there's a bunch of constants for the calculation mode, and you can look them up yourself if you look up the calculation modes in the documentation, but essentially they're under the CAKeyframeAnimation stuff here, and these first few are the ones you want to look at. But anyway, for example, if I make my animation discrete, this means that the animations, it won't actually calculate any between points for the animations. So the animation will essentially just jump. So as you can see, I run this animation, takes 4 seconds, and then it will jump to the next point. It's going to take another 4 seconds, and it will jump to the next point, and then it's going to jump to those other points in 1 second each, right? So that's the idea of the CAKeyframeAnimation discrete. You can actually set up an animation to not really animate between points, but technically I guess it's still an animation, but it's not as pleasant as you might think it would be. Another cool one to play around with is CAKeyframeAnimation cubic, and this is kind of a neat one because it doesn't really do what you might expect, but you can watch it here. And as you can see, it kind of adjusts the frame as it perceives the speed of the next point. So as you can see, it kind of does this nice little animation at the end, but it's not following the linear path. It's not moving in a direct line to each point, but it's kind of computing this sort of curved path between each one. So you can actually even control different aspects of that as well, but we won't worry about that in this tutorial since we don't have enough time to go through that. But another example would be, or another thing that we could do is even change the repeat count or the repeat duration. So let's change the repeat duration to be, let's say 4 seconds long. So if the repeat duration is 4 seconds long, my duration I'll make something shorter, like 3 seconds. So if I do this, you can see that the animation will take 3 seconds to complete, and then it will go until 4 seconds total, and that's when it will stop. Another interesting thing you might want to play around with is the repeat count. So if I make the repeat count 2, for example, then I don't think what does repeat count take as an integer? No, it's a float. So anyway, you could change the repeat count, and if I make it 2 in this case, it means that the whole animation will repeat twice. So as you can see, our duration 3 seconds, but it repeats it twice. The last one I'll show you for this tutorial anyway is how you can change auto reverses is the key I'm looking for here. So the auto reverses property allows you to say that the animation will automatically reverse itself on completion. So when the animation completes in 3 seconds, it'll reverse itself and do the exact same thing in the reverse order. So it takes 3 seconds to go back around in the same fashion. So that's a few properties you might want to play around with, and feel free to play around with some of the values and the key times as well. But that is essentially how keyframe animations work. In the next tutorial, I'll briefly cover how we can work with paths in keyframe animations, and we'll finish off all the tutorials on that one. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and please stick around for the other ones. Please subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, feel free to send them my way or leave them in the comment section below, and subscribe to me on Twitter @LucasDara. Anyway, I will see you in the next tutorial. See you then.